Welcome to the Faculty of Architecture lecture series for the Monsoon 2020 semester. So I think, as is clear from the poster, it's a series of 7 lectures over 7 Saturdays. Professor Vishwanath Kashikar is delivering this first talk, and which is in the nature of an interactive session with the students. And I think he said he would be introducing himself, although he really needs no introduction on the CEPT campus. And so with that, I would request Kashi and the students to take it away. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Anjali. Thanks a lot. So yes, in fact, when Varisha approached me for this FA lecture series, I think the first thought that came to my mind was there are so many webinars going on everywhere around. There's no dearth of people that we can listen to, which I think is very fascinating as well. But I think very soon we need to coin a term for webinar burnout because of the number of webinars going around. It is from this perspective that I thought that it might be interesting to have a conversation rather than where I just keep talking about stuff. And in a way, the questions that the students have framed in a way probably will be a very elaborate introduction of myself. So I see this entire 1.5 or odd hours as an introduction of myself, and I think as we keep conversing, probably I'll keep introducing bits and pieces of myself. Yeah. So great. So from that perspective, maybe we can begin.
I suppose they will ask their questions and then you will answer them? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, that is how it is.
Sure.
So, good morning.
Morning, Ashwini.
What were your thoughts about architecture just after you graduated? And what were some of the influences that carved out the way that you took forward?
Okay. Well, so I graduated in the year 2000, although I had joined architecture in 93. So I think one of the traditions at CEPT has been that you join, the batch is identified as the batch in which you join, but the year you graduate keeps fluctuating for everyone. So, well, this first question really made me sort of go back in time and try to figure out what were my thoughts in the year 2000, just after I graduated. So actually, in those days, you would submit your research thesis, and then the actual thesis viva would take place anywhere between 2 to 6 months between your submission and after your submission. So I remember that I think I submitted sometime in end February 2000, and actually I took about a 15-20 day break where I think I was not thinking about architecture at all. I was sort of really relieved that I had finished, and but then I think within 15 days I was bored. 15-20 days maybe I was really bored. I'm sure like happens with at least the senior students that we really look forward to the vacation, but after 10-15 days of the vacation we're like, what now? So so then I immediately joined Professor Chaya's office. So when when I joined, just a year or so before that, they had, I mean, earlier it was called Mandala Architects. I think Neelkant Chaya, Sohan Neelkant, and Alok Joshi, three architects were together, and they had done many projects together. But at that time, I think a year or so ago, they had decided to run their individual practices. So it was a very small office. There's only one more person working with Professor Chaya at that time, and I joined. Uh, I don't think at that time I was consciously thinking about where I'm heading or what am I going to do, or what are my larger views on what is architecture. I don't recollect any such sort of far-reaching questions that I was asking. But now, when I look back, in order to talk about the second part of the question, what were the influences that carved out the way you look forward? Uh, so again, I would say these were not sort of foregrounded in my mind at that point in time after I had graduated. But definitely, if I look back now on my architectural education and all the teachers who had taught me at that point in time, uh, I think one of the biggest influences I would say was that I saw that uh, uh, each teacher or a group of teachers had their own position vis-a-vis architecture, and uh, and this would especially play out during the studio juries. So, for example, I distinctly remember giving my fourth year, that is semester 8 jury, just before going on exchange, and we had to give a early jury because we were leaving early for Zurich, and there were like seven, I think six or seven jurors sitting on that panel. Uh, Professor Rameshwar and PDK Rameshwar and Gurjit Singh were the teachers, and in the jury there was Chaya, Varki, Nikki Desai, Gemini Mehta, and Leo Pereira. Yeah. None of whom would have the same position on what is architecture, right? So, uh, in a way, it was nice that I didn't have to explain much in a jury because I was explaining a bit, and they started arguing amongst themselves as to whether this is appropriate or not. It was an urban insert studio. We had a site very close to the Lake Palace in Udaipur, the main city, sorry, the city palace in Udaipur. So people started fighting amongst each other, and so as you can see, that is those were some very vivid memories of uh, teachers arguing against each other. But then after the jury, you would see them sitting at the canteen, sharing a cup of chai and laughing away. Not at me, hopefully, not at my design, but generally about something else. So I think that has probably left a lasting impression on me that uh, uh, it is possible or probably also important to have different positions and recognize them and yet not make it personal. And in hindsight, I think that is something that was a heavy influence that set that to force us to take positions and yet not become personal or vindictive about that. Yeah. Yeah, I could go on and on, but maybe we could take another question and leave it into the conversation.
So the second question is, does the image of what architecture means to you remain constant in your mind from the beginning, or does it change over the years?
Uh, Definitely, I would say it changes over the years. It has not remained constant. And uh, probably, of course, because of the kind of things that one keeps doing. And definitely being a teacher for a long time and seeing so many students and seeing so many colleagues, faculty members having their own positions, it has changed over a period of time. And I wouldn't be able to trace a singular journey of how it has changed over a period of time. Uh, but I would definitely say that uh, probably I have become more sort of cognizant and maybe at peace with the thought that there could be multiple ways in which one could look at architecture, and that in their own ways they are that they make sense, and that it is important for it to exist. Because in the initial years, uh, of course, just immediately after graduating, there was one view of architecture, which I would say was primarily about architecture with a capital A, about form, scale, proportion, order, tectonics, texture, and so on. Uh, and of course, working in an office, so I worked for about 4 years in Professor Chaya's office. So at that time, I was primarily involved in residences, bungalows, just maybe one or two institution type projects like the Crafts Park in Kutch. And I think after the Gujarat earthquake, we were also involved in a school in Anjar, and also post earthquake housing in Bhavania. Uh, so I think because of that, because of the different types of projects, so we were doing a residence for Kartikeya Sarabhai, one residence for MS Khurana, who is a big contractor in Ahmedabad. Uh, so on one hand, were these private residences where we would have to go with the client to select tiles, and there would be discussions over the smallest of details. And on the other hand, we were doing a post-earthquake school in Anjar, like I was saying, where there was no client as such, in the sense that it was a government project, the school was completely demolished and so on. So I think that began the journey of thinking that we have to look at architecture in different ways, that it means different things to different people. It means differently to people who have lost their houses in an earthquake, or for institutions which have to rebuild themselves, versus a private client who is building his or her own bungalow, that it means different things. So I think I would say that was probably the starting of that journey of being aware of that. Although, there were a lot of times where there was a lot of dilemma and on one hand, like spending days on end selecting a tile for a bathroom, and you're selecting different tiles for different bathrooms for a particular client. And on the other hand, in Bhavania, we were designing 500 houses at one go, right, which had to be approached in a very different manner. So obviously, as a young graduate, you're sort of very angry about it in a way, to see that imbalance between the two, uh, between the way we were going about the project as well as how much of the inequalities between the architect and the client, the unequal positions between the architect and the client. But yeah, like I said, then maybe over a period of time, having to deal with multiple such projects, I think I made peace with it, and probably it is in education, after teaching so many studios with so many different colleagues, many of whom were my own teachers when I was studying. Uh, I have become sort of more and more aware that what architecture means doesn't remain constant, uh, and that it does keep changing over the years. But like I said, now I'm not in a situation where I would say that this is architecture. now I'm in a position where, at least as of now, I believe that uh, there could be many different architectures or meanings of architecture that can coexist, and that it is very contextual. Yeah.
Okay, another good one. Uh, can you listen, sir?
Yeah, now your voice is clear.
Yeah.
Yeah, go ahead, Yoga.
Being a student, were you interested in the subject of housing? If yes, what was your interest towards that area? And if not, what made you choose this? And how do you take that along with you right now, as in your approach towards that very subjective subject?
Was I interested in housing as a student? Well, so when we were studying, we had we were studying the first year was called first year. It did not have specific programmatic studios. Third semester was called Form Space and Order. Anant Raje used to teach it. Fourth semester was called Housing. Uh, Although it was more of individual residence design, uh, but also clustering. So we would be given a site where we had to design, and usually it used to be between 20 to 30 houses. In most, I think, I don't recollect anyone doing apartment typology at that point in time. Usually it was bungalows which were repeated, or row houses that were repeated. So it was a intermediate between individual residence design and cluster, or what you could actually term as housing. Although the stress was on individual residence design, so of course I did that semester. Fifth semester was institution, sixth was what was called working drawings, and seven was of course office training. Eight was optional options, institution, urban insert or urban design, and ninth semester was your final design project. So I did the second year housing. I wouldn't say that at that point in time I had any sort of bias or particular interest in that semester over the other semesters. It was just like any other semester. I think my next brush with housing, we were never offered a urban housing studio in semester 8, so I didn't do it. I did that urban insert Udaipur project that I just mentioned earlier. My next brush was with my thesis. So my research thesis topic was on housing. It was titled The Sense of Belonging, the Character of Community Space, where I compared old houses with government walk-up apartments with uh, bungalow typology. So I compared three different housing types in Ahmedabad. That was my thesis topic. At which point I was, of course, interested at that point in time in housing. Oh yeah, I forget to mention that when I was doing my office training uh, in Mandala Designs, they were designing this housing project in Calcutta called Udayan. It's a Bengal Ambuja housing development in Australia. So there, of course, I was involved in that. Actually, that reminds me that after second year, in the vacation, I got really bored. So I started working in the same office. So at that time, Son Nilkant, one of the partners, he was designing the low-income housing of that Calcutta project. So I was working in his office making working drawings. But yeah, so I was doing all that, but I don't recollect particularly being fascinated by housing, with housing at that point in time. So even when I did my thesis, of course, I was interested in the topic while I was doing it. But after graduation, I had no particular inkling towards it. So, for example, when I started working, I did not actively search for an office which would be doing urban housing projects. No, nothing of that sort. Uh, I guess so. I worked in Professor Chaya's office for about 4 years, and then in 2004 I left to do my masters in the National University of Singapore. It was a research. It is what is called masters by research. Uh, so as for the admission itself, you have to write a thesis proposal or a research proposal. So at that time, since I had just worked in an office for 4 years, doing just residential project in this post-earthquake housing and all that, uh, at that time probably I thought that, oh, I've already done my undergraduate research on housing, so let me just put in a proposal on housing uh, because it makes sense. So my research proposal for my master's thesis, eventually the title of the thesis was Temporal Dimensions of Flexibility. So I was interested in flexibility in mass housing because I had done the Bavania project where the post-earthquake housing, where there were discussions on how to design housing so that people can modify. Whereas the Calcutta housing that I was involved in, there the HIG towers, in one tower they had 26 different apartment types. So that sort of strand got me. And yeah, so and in my undergraduate research, when I was studying this government housing in Ahmedabad, I was studying how people had made additions to their housing over a period of time. How people had added a balcony, a room, uh, and various other things. So now in hindsight, I realized that at different points in time, I had looked at different ways in which people make variations or changes in their housing. So I took that up as my master's topic. At that point in time, so when I went for my master's, I got introduced to Habrakan and its supports and infill theory. Uh, and yes, so at that point, I did research on housing. Uh, and I think after that, of course, that became one of the key interests of mine, and it continues to be so. And so, to answer the third part of that question, that how do I take along this interest now? So as many of you might have experienced, so one is of course the studios that I take. The level 3 studios that I take are usually related to housing. Uh, and then of course I usually take, and one strand of electives that I take is called History of Housing Design, and the other is called Notions of Domesticity. So, so I use both the coursework and the studio as spaces to not only experiment and explore, but also for myself clarify my interests. So, again, since many of you, at least the senior students, have attended the elective, you know that no two instances of the elective are pure, exactly identical, even though I'm offering it as the same sort of the title of elective again and again. Uh, and yeah, so I think these become avenues to take forward this interest in housing. Uh, although housing is not the only sort of, I would say, not the only interest I have. The other interest I have, again, developed over a period of time is in architectural education. Uh, but I think maybe that ties in with the next question, maybe. So we could move ahead.
Yeah. So another question is that what was it that tied you to academics instead of architecture practice? What are your thoughts on these two options and the opportunities they offer in today's context?
What was it that tied you to academics instead of architectural practice? Okay. Uh, well, hindsight is a tricky thing because you tend to pick and choose those aspects of your past which make sense now, right? So, if I mean, I could go further back and say that when I was in school, in primary and secondary school, I always used to be a teacher on Teachers' Day. I used to enjoy that. But I don't know whether that is. I'm sure if I was someone else, I would have looked at some other aspect, picked up some other aspect of my past and said that, oh, this is where it began. So in that sense, hindsight is a tricky thing. But I loved being a teacher in my school days. So much so that I think by the time I was in 9th standard, on Teachers' Day, I used to be the principal because I was one of the few sort of students who had been teacher for all Teachers' Day. But anyways, I don't think that was a conscious sort of thing. Uh, I would say that the first sort of the first time I was consciously aware of my interest in teaching was when I was studying in SET. And I'm sure it still probably happens now that for subjects, especially subjects like structures, uh, more than half the class doesn't get it. But you have one or two students who in class who are good at it. And then so you start taking classes for your batchmates. Uh, I don't know whether that happens now. Uh, I'm sure it must be happening, if not in large groups, at least in small groups. Uh, so I used to take structures classes for all my batchmates. It was not unique in the sense that in every batch there used to be someone who takes structures class. But again, in hindsight, when I look at it, I wouldn't say that I always got the highest marks in structures. I mean, I probably did in some of them, not if not all. There were other students who were equally good or were getting equal marks in structures in my class, but they would not step up to teach. And I think that is where I would make a very important distinction that just because you're good at a subject doesn't necessarily mean you're good at teaching it. Of course, I didn't. I'm not saying I realized that at that point in time. But I used to teach structures at that time. Our curriculum, of course, was very different. We had 6 structures from first year to third year. Every semester we had structures, and that used to be a huge stumbling block for all students. In fact, the exchange list would get whittled down primarily because people failed in structures. The interesting bit is that this used to be common knowledge. So by the time I was in third year, uh, 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 Professor D.R. Shah, whom some of you would know, because he has taught you. So I distinctly remember one sort of, I think it was semester 6 structures, uh, where he came to me about a few days before the exam and told me that ठीक से class ले लेना before the exam. Okay? Uh, because he was aware that in every batch there would be some student taking classes for others. So uh, I think that it is at that time because I was doing it every semester. For 6 semesters, I would teach my batchmates, and that is where I think I was sort of more in my inclination towards teaching grew at that point in time. So when after graduation, when I joined Professor Chaya's office, that was like I said, the year 2000. Uh, I used to just attend juries, not as a juror, but I would request Professor Chaya to let me leave the office and attend juries for final juries, and obviously I think he was absolutely fine with it. So I would make notes. So I think that's how my sort of unofficial teaching journey began. Uh, so I remember, I think it was the 2000 batch ka jury. I think the third year jury where I made notes and sketches for each of the students. So then the teachers saw it and they really wanted those sketches and the pointers to share with the student. And then in 2002 was the first time I started assisting in teaching. Uh, this was first year studio. Uh, so it was the 2002 batch first year studio that I started assisting. So I was working in the office and I would be assisting in the studio. So I did that for about a year and a half, but then I went abroad for my masters. So when I came in 2006, end of 2006, I started working with Riaz on one hand, and then I started I took my first fourth year urban housing studio because I had done this masters where my topic was in housing. I was asked to conduct a studio. I already had assisted for 2 years, and of course all my teachers knew me as a student as well. So because I was teaching in the same place that I was studying, I think it was easier. And so I, like I said, I was working with years, but also teaching part time. And then I think in 2007, full time faculty positions opened up at SET. Uh, I mean, it was an open advertisement. So uh, at that time, I applied and I got through it, and that's how I started teaching full time. As to the second, so like I said, my interest in long-term interest in teaching uh, my students to be my batchmates to begin with, and then later on as a teaching assistant is what led me to academics. Before I move on to the next subpart, probably another aspect I should bring up is that uh, uh, my mother was, I think she still is, but she has retired. My mother was a first standard school teacher all her life. And my father was also interested in teaching, but he ended up in a government. So I vividly remember so many instances in my childhood where my parents would patiently explain me things, irrespective of what it was. I mean, if I had fallen down and I was crying, for example, uh, instead of immediately sort of taking care of me and instead of sort of trying to uh, I don't know, maybe give some sweet or do something so that I stop crying. I remember they would always explain to me why I fell down why or why is the reason that I cried. I think probably that's also the reason that I tend to explain a lot and I love explaining things and clarifying things, which also works well in the teaching profession, right? Because you're primarily there to explain things. As to what are my thoughts on these two options in today's context, that is academics versus architectural practice? Uh, I mean, as a side note, I would just say that there are various forms of practicing architecture, one of which is, of course, designing buildings. And so the way I would put it, teaching or getting into government to change bylaws or regulations, becoming an IAS officer, or doing architectural journalism where you write for magazines, or architectural photography where you might be photographing. They're all different forms of architectural practice, right? Because your practice stems from the field of architecture. Yeah? Because you're doing architectural journalism or architectural photography or architectural education. Of course, you could also diversify into some other field entirely, in which case I wouldn't call it architectural practice. So I think today there are multiple opportunities uh, in terms of how you can practice architecture. Uh, And so I don't think it is about a competition between these two options of academics instead of uh, designing buildings. I mean, like a lot of your teachers, for example, are doing both, right? They are practitioners as well as teachers. So I don't think you need to choose between the two. Of course, having said that, I have made a choice in the sense that it has been quite a few years since I have designed a building. In the sense, designed something and taken it to the stage of construction where it gets manifested. I think that's a very personal choice. That's because I'm more interested in academia than I am in practicing architecture. It gives me more joy. So I have taken that call. But I think each one of you should make their own choice. I don't think I had clarity when I graduated, so I don't think it is about having clarity right now as to what you want to do. Maybe some of you have that, maybe some of you don't have that. I didn't have that when I graduated. It just developed over a period of time. So shall we move on to the next question?
Yeah, due to connectivity issues, Sandra couldn't join us, so I would like to ask questions on her behalf. The question is there a pattern in which you design the courses that you offer? Like designing a studio is like designing a project. So how do you design the courses that you offer?
Okay. Um, is there a pattern with which I design the courses? Uh, well, I think, I mean, the part answer is embedded in the question itself that designing a studio or course is like designing a project. Uh, again, I'm sure to the people who have taken studios that I am offering now or I have offered in the past, like the L2 studio on Verticity, for example, or the Foundation Studio, First Year Studio. I am really interested in architectural education and I'm really interested in the design of architectural education. I think that has been an interest of mine since quite some time. So, in fact, there if I go slightly further back in history, when we were doing thesis, at that time we started as students, a student group voluntarily started the process of curriculum discussing the curriculum amongst the students and preparing a note on the positives and negatives of it. So I think that is when I was really interested in the design of curricula as a whole, uh, and I think the university offered that space and that freedom to do so, in the sense that we were not explicitly, but through the actions of all our teachers, we felt confident enough to discuss, as students discuss curriculum with our teachers and what we felt about it, and they engaged in that discussion, and I think that has stayed with me. So, of course, it was not a fault finding or a binding kind of critique. So, along with some other students, when we were in thesis, we prepared a 50-page report on the current curriculum. So we did a lot of homework and we studied and we prepared the report. It was not like ye kam nahi kar raha, wo kam nahi kar raha, not that kind of critique. If we had done that, we would have been shocked. So uh, yeah, I think I really enjoy designing the courses that I take, whether it is the elective or whether it's the studio. And I'm really interested in, so I do, when I'm designing the courses, I try multiple options, just like you would do in a design studio. And then I weigh the merits and demerits of different options. Uh, and then of course every sort of run of that studio is in a way for myself an experiment. So I look at that studio closely and try to understand what works well, what doesn't work well, which I can then incorporate in the next run of that studio. Uh, so I do multiple iterations, runs of that studio in my head while designing. And I sort of compare and contrast one option of the studio structure with another option of the studio structure and ask myself what would work better, what would work. So uh, I think it's a very important component. Otherwise, the tendency is to just teach what you are good at or teach what you are comfortable with or teach in a manner that you are comfortable with, which personally I don't believe in. I think that even as a teacher, one is the content component of it, which is architectural knowledge, but the other, which is the knowledge of education. Uh, since most of us are not professionally educated in the field of education, we don't have a B.Ed or a M.Ed degree. That is something that we have to do ourselves. Right? So, yeah, that is something that uh, I constantly try to do, which is why, again, I'm sure for the students who are aware, that first year studio of mine or that Verticity studio or this L3 Oikopolis studio or the master's MArch studio I took last time titled The Practice, you'd notice that the studio structures are very different from each other. The way they are scheduled, the way the problem is stated, the kind of uh, additional or parallel exercises that are done in the studio are very different from each other.
The next question is
Yes.
that as a teacher, what are the qualities that a student should have according to you, not behavioral but academically?
What are the qualities a student should have? I think, okay, maybe the most important, or I'm still thinking as I'm speaking, maybe the only quality a student needs to have is insatiable desire to learn. Uh, Personally, in all these years, I find it much tougher to deal with students who are disinterested than to deal with students who are weak uh, in their grasp of a problem. Uh, I don't think that content knowledge or in that sense the content knowledge is important. I don't look for that as a quality that the student should possess. I think the only quality a student should have is at every point in time they should be asking, am I learning enough? Am I doing enough to be able to learn? And in that sense, challenge their own self and as well as challenge the teacher in order to, in order to put learning on the pedestal. And I think that, I mean, these are my personal beliefs. I think that entire institution should be structured like that, where they don't put the student on the pedestal or the teacher on the pedestal or the admin on the pedestal, but put learning on the pedestal, that the entire university exists only to facilitate learning. So, in a very different context, I mean, I do for some other institutions who call me as their as a mentor or board of studies or whatever you want to call that. I've had multiple discussions and thoughts on how to structure in such that everyone from a Mali or a peon to a teacher to a student to a president, they change the way they work in order to facilitate learning so that everyone puts learning on the pedestal. Just to give I know I'm digressing, but just to give a simple example, if I take a jhadu wala, I'm interested in the fact that in a architectural college, how should a person who's sweeping be different from a maybe a management college? Because again, you must have faced this all the time that when a sweeper comes into your studio, obviously they don't know what is junk and what is extremely useful, right? And a lot of times they tend to come just before the jury is there because they have been asked to clear the studio for the jury. So there is always a mismatch between how someone is thinking about their job, because they are thinking from their perspective. They are thinking that I have to clean everything that is on their floor. They are not thinking of how I am helping the student learn better. But I would say the same thing of the student also, in the sense that, especially in first year, I see that the wash basin is always full of ink, right? Because uh, uh, you're using charcoal or whatever. And but if everyone asks themselves, how do we keep learning on the pedestal, maybe our actions might change. So, coming back to this question, so I think a student should always privilege want to learn, and I think as an institution or as a teacher, I always try to give that uh, uh, make it clear to the student that if there are any challenges that the student faces in his or her learning ability or will to learn, that they should immediately talk to someone, yeah, to the teacher or someone, to say that what are the challenges. Because a lot of times the challenges have nothing to do with architecture. Maybe you're just feeling bored or you're just not able to get yourself to work, and therefore you're not performing well as a student in terms of learning.
Yeah, so next,
Yes.
do you think that a person's characteristic or events in life are reflected in his or her design? And if this is true, then can one really separate their work from their personal life?
Yeah, definitely. I think a person's characteristics or life events do get reflected in their design. And I don't know why you would want to separate work from your personal life, in the sense that I mean, then work becomes work. If you have separated work from your personal life, I think it is more important to have a good sense of perspective over your entire life, so that one does not sort of completely overpower the other. But I think everyone's hope is that they end up in a work environment or doing the kind of work that they really enjoy doing, so that they don't have to think of their work life as separate from their personal life, because then work will be work and outside work will be happy hours, right? And inside work, sad hours. But I think, yes, I think it does get reflected in your designs, consciously or subconsciously. There's no way you can stop that, and I see no reason why you should even thinking of not letting that affect.
So the next question is, what are your thoughts about the present situation and future of architectural education?
Present situation of architectural education?
Yeah, yes.
Well, it's a big question about my thoughts of the future of architectural, present and the future of architectural education. Uh, I think that one, of course, it is important for education to constantly be asking this question, right? What is the present and what is the future of education, especially uh, uh, in a program which is 5 years long. That by the time you graduate, probably the world has already changed a bit, if not substantially, and I think a few years back I would have said that uh, uh, that we are moving from an age of we are moving into an age of the digital revolution, and therefore ease of access of information, and therefore how architectural education should not concentrate on imparting of information, because information is easily accessible to everyone. Right? So again, if I go back to my education, when we did not have internet, we just had books in the library, and there is a time lag when it comes to books, right? If a new building was built in Europe, it would take about 5 to 7 years before a book of it could be published, and then, as in photographs taken, published, and then it would come to said would have to purchase that book, and that is when you come to know of that building. The internet, of course, changed all that, and therefore now anyone can know about or see photographs or plans or buildings. So now the task of educators is not so much to give information, but to make sense of it, to give meaning to that information, to contextualize it. But like I said, I would have said that a few years back. Now, if you ask me, I think there's an additional role of education, which of course affects architectural education also. Is that I think now we are in an age of information overload. First, everyone was happy with access to information. Now there is information overload. And even making sense overload. Like I was saying, the number of webinars or lectures of different colleges over the world that I can access now, especially now with Corona, it has increased even more, right? All lectures are available online. So it is not only information, but someone talking of that information. So even contextualizing information wala lectures is also now an overload. So I think now the task of education is to how to additionally is also how to see all that information and make uh, some meaning out of it. Uh, and that of course then has to affect all our courses, mandatory courses as well as design students. But that is one aspect of it. I think the other huge aspect of it is related to how architecture is practiced, or at least the making of buildings, one of practice of architecture is practiced, uh, which, but I guess that is probably your next question about practice. So maybe we could take that up and
Yeah, hi. The next set of questions is from me.
yes.
So as architecture students enter the field in times when a lot about pedagogy and practice is being questioned, what do you think are possible ways to move forward into the field? In addition to this question, what aspects of the old or the general way of studying architecture do you think are crucial and must be continued? Whereas what are the additions that our education must make to become relevant to today's context?
Mhm. So yeah, I guess yes, a lot of pedagogy and practice is being questioned, but I don't think that this questioning is new. This, I mean, at least if you look at the history of SET, every 10 years or so we have had a new curriculum. There have been debates about the curriculum. So we have a 1980 curriculum, 1990 curriculum, 2000 curriculum. However, probably I would say that the pace at which this rethinking has to occur maybe has increased. Now we can no longer afford 10 years before we rethink pedagogy and practice. Uh, the rate of change has increased. But like you were asking in the second bit of question, I think some the key thing that has not changed is that the for architects who are practicing the design of buildings, what has not changed is that you are involved partially or wholly in telling people how to build in terms of configuration and dimension of spaces and their materiality. Right? Even though maybe the way we make working drawings might change, the way we use software might change, or how much we are in control of the design process might change, at least for the building practice part of it, I think that has remained the same. That we need to uh, 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 learn scale, proportion. We need to learn materiality, how it comes together, and the impact of it. We need to know strategies to deal with environment and climate, strategies to deal with people, not only clients but people at large, and strategies to deal with the materiality with which we are working. That is all the building materials and all. So the fact that we have to deal with the environment, the natural environment, the social environment, and the physical environment, that we cannot escape that I think has remained the same. I think many architects have also realized that by themselves they cannot be masters or adept at dealing with all three environments and knowing their finer nuances. And therefore you need to collaborate with other professionals or specialists. And in that sense, the ability to collaborate uh, and but also at the same time, I think to know that we are dealing with increasingly more and more complex situations is something that we need to be aware of. But I do strongly also feel that in all this we should not forget that primarily we are designing spaces, and there might be multitude of spaces, there might be just one space, one doesn't know. You might only be designing a part of a space or many spaces. So I think the ability to form your own gauge of measuring, uh, uh, the ability to gauge for yourself your sense of taste when it comes to space making is something that will not change. The way you have to deal with people, with finances, with regulations, with society at large will change. And of course, how you set up your offices and the whole business of running an architectural practice, I think is a whole world in itself, uh, which uh, uh, which requires its own discussion of how do we make or build a practice.
The next question is, with growing environment crisis and parameters affecting design, how could multidisciplinary collaboration work out in practice, drawing on the lines of what we just talked about? Does a school then focus on developing this quality in a student to become a part of a team instead of becoming someone on the top?
Okay. Yes, definitely there is multidisciplinary collaboration is becoming necessary in many different types of projects, uh, and that could be across practices. But we also are seeing the making of mega practices which have in-house specializations, right? So that they do everything. So on the other hand, I also do see the growth of turnkey design and build kind of practices, which are offering all kinds of services together. Does a school focus on developing this quality in a student? Of course, the quality is necessary, but I think we should also be aware that a school can only do so much. That the school cannot, any school cannot educate you in all aspects of what you will encounter in the practice. Uh, Also, because the future itself is unpredictable, and therefore, how does one prepare you? So, yes, the school should develop, uh, uh, should should nurture the students to develop capabilities to deal with this future world, and one of them is multidisciplinary collaboration work. I think most schools in India are still grappling in different ways with the whole the modern idea of architectural education, which is all about the master architect. Uh, so I think most uh, uh, architecture schools are more comfortable with studios which privilege the master architect, where you're talking of becoming an architect with a capital A, but they're still struggling to talk about how do we discuss other ways of practicing architecture, which where it's not one person who is the master of the entire process, but you are part of the team which is doing it. I think it's a challenge, and so although it cannot be seen from the perspective of everything that you encounter in the world you should encounter in your education. I don't think that's possible. But yet, yes, if you were to ask the question, what are the capabilities that the education is building in you, uh, then definitely if maybe the capability to collaborate, to negotiate, uh, uh, to have shared values or shared methods of designing or to design with someone else, if that is not there, it does become difficult. But I guess then you are thrown into, when you start practicing and you join an office as a junior architect, that is when it hits. Right? I think this is why most people then want to very quickly move to starting their own practice. Because they feel that that is when they get the intellectual freedom to design what they want the way they want. Uh, which in places like India is very strong, right? Most people would want to start their own practice rather than working in practice because it does not provide that opportunity of being in complete control over how you design, what you design, and so on. Yeah.
Okay, so the questions that we had written have been answered by you very nicely, and now we have some other questions by the audience. So, first question is, what is the current influence of philosophy in architecture and architectural practice as compared to the past, and how relevant or important is one to the other?
It's like an examination. What's the current, I mean, in a good way, I'm not so critiquing you, but current influence of philosophy in architecture, in architectural practice. I don't even know the past influence of philosophy in architecture or architectural practice. Uh, I will need time to answer uh, this one. So maybe if Shabir can come back to me after a week, maybe I'll be able to say some things. Right now, and I don't want to say something without thinking.
Okay, sir.
Yes, question.
Yes.
Is there a list that you have? Should I post it to the host or can I just?
No,
Go
no,
ahead
no.
and
You can
ask
ask.
the question.
Okay. Hi, Kashi. Thank you. It's always inspiring to hear you talk. You spoke earlier about how, professors have always had different positions. They've even argued about it, but then been able to go and have a cup of tea together. And you also follow the same with your students, where you don't impose, say, your own ideas or positions and let the students develop their own. And then someone was asking about how characteristics or how their personal life might also weave in with the work and the profession. So my question is that in a world that now there are so many overlapping, and then there's this whole idea of the information overload, and we are all constantly caught up in conflicting or uncertain positions with respect to not just architecture, but say politics or human rights and ethical issues and a lot of other things. So, is it possible for us to have a purely architectural pedagogy that is not informed or influenced, or how do you sort of keep one away from the other? Or when dealing with students, especially who are at this impressionable age, young adults who are making up their minds about the world, as a facilitator, as a guide mentor, how do you interact with them?
Well, personally, I believe that positions once taken should constantly be questioned. I'm very wary of people who take positions and defend it till death. Uh, and But I find it fascinating that, you know, uh, at least of whatever little is written. For example, if I look at Philip Johnson, okay, he was a modernist and then he turned into a postmodernist. Somehow, most, at least architectural historians, don't look kindly on him for for having changed his position. But I wonder how you can have a position and not change it, because position is something that, of course, has a your own past history to it. But I think position, the way I look at it, the position you take is a constant thing that every day you are putting your position in front of the world as it is now, or what is happening in the world, and ask yourself, does that position still, uh, is that position still valid? Can I still take that position because now I have this new information, or because now this has happened in the world? So that is where, and now coming to the education bit of it, so the, as a teacher, I would be more interested in talking about how do you take a position and what are the things that we can do uh, uh, consciously, because subconsciously also we end up taking positions without giving conscious thought to it. But I am more interested in how do you take a position, what do you study, what do you read, do you have a Socratic discussion or debate, what are the processes by which you end up taking a position. And I would really like to at least be very clear with the student that the way I look at it, the position is not frozen or etched in stone. So, of course, like you're saying, I think in junior years, at least second, maybe third year, it is difficult to talk about positions. Uh, but definitely in fourth, fifth year, one could begin to talk about it. In education, I am also wary of uh, 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 by education, even in the world, and wary of people who take positions without having understood the perspective of the other people, or having actually grappled with that position or tool or technology, whatever that might be. I mean, just to give architectural example, so if someone says, computers are bad and drawing is so much better, I'm okay with engaging with a person who is a master in computer software and how that can be leveraged for drawing or designing, and then saying that it is a bad tool. But when I see the number of people who are so happy stating that they are software illiterate, but yet saying that software is problematic, I have a problem with any aspect. I'm just giving this as an example. How can you take a position on something without actually having studied? Just on some anecdotal or sort of cursory glance at that.
That's what you said.
Okay.
Can I
So,
ask one question, please? Hello.
yes, yes.
I have a question regarding, so you spoke about knowledge of content and knowledge of education. And probably this question might not be that helpful for the students, but for the young academics who might have joined us for the conversation, if you could throw some light on how to explore the knowledge of education. I mean, you're right in saying that we've not done B.Ed or M.Ed, but we want to engage with the learning and teaching bit. And so if you could throw some light on that.
No, yeah, you are absolutely right. It has, for me, has been a struggle or a challenge that in my initial years, both as a teaching assistant and a teacher, I was concentrating primarily on the content of education. So, for example, when designing or even conducting a studio, say I was doing housing studio, I would concentrate on what project will I give, what will be the site, and while discussing with the student, I would primarily be reacting to the designs that students have produced. Right? So maybe something is not working, maybe structure is not working. So I would point it out and ask them to work that out. So my questions initially were always what to teach, and while in juries and in during table discussions, the questions were always what can be improved, or what is not working, or what can be improved. Over a period of time, I have changed the questions for myself. So, when I'm thinking of a studio, I don't think of what I will teach uh, in terms of site or program or studio. I ask myself, the first question I ask myself is, why do I want to uh, teach? After having decided a broad content, so for example, if I'm saying housing, I first ask myself the question why I want to teach housing, or what I want the student to learn from it, and I ask the question how do I want to teach it. Okay, so I focus more on that. This is not to say that I don't think about the program or site or what I want to teach, but I focus more on that. And more important, I think, is the student discussion or interaction with student, where I have stopped asking the question what can be improved or why, what can be improved or how it can be improved. I think with the student, I might still be discussing that to some extent. The question I ask myself, and which is in most cases difficult to answer, is I ask myself, why has the student not been able to do this? Rather than asking what the student has not been able to do and how they can improve it, I ask myself why the student has not been able to do this. But that, like I said, because I believe that students cannot, no one can separate their personality from the work that they do. In order for me to understand why the student was not able to do it, requires me to understand that student extremely well, without which it becomes difficult. So, uh, a lot of times, I'm sure, Milosha, you must also have felt that at sometimes I'm extremely strict, and sometimes I'm extremely lenient, right? So for a lot of people who are teaching with me, that is sort of extremely disconcerting. How can, when you were strict with us, or at that time, or for that thing you were extremely strict, how come you're so easily giving in to the student now? That is because I have been asking that question, why the student was not able to do it. And if I realize that pressure will not help, then I don't put pressure. If I realize that pressure will help, I put pressure. So,
नाही अजून चालू आहे.
Just on a lighter note, so
yes.
Conversations with other TAs and students have led us to realize that discussions with you are sometimes like a therapy session.
I agree. Like
Yeah,
a
yeah.
modern Buddha, no? Then
Yes.
Yeah, I don't want to become a therapist, okay? No, I think this probably stems from this search of mine, where I'm concentrating more on why it is happening. So, I know, like, depending on who I am having the conversation with, like Isha, for example, I get right to the point at times. Mm, Identifying why that problem is being faced rather than focusing on the problem.
Thank you.
Hello.
Yes,
Yes,
you.
Chandra.
Hi, sir.
Hello.
Hi. So, I think that the previous answer was actually very helpful. Yeah, and I have a question on a sort of larger level, on a larger institution level. Like, not a question, but I just want to know your comment on this. As as I've been seeing different schools of architecture, like for example, any IIT school of architecture, they have this clear idea that the architects they want to produce are going to be very much professional. They will know how to put themselves in front of their clients, etc., as compared to schools in Tamil Nadu, for example, who are, I mean, very well versed with all the softwares, and they can easily think using the softwares, etc. So, in that way, what according to you should be like the core ideology of any institute of architecture in the current situation? Like, are we looking at producing architects who are as professional as engineers, let's say, because most of the offices currently also who are, you know, whom we are working with, the initial years is almost the job is very mundane, like wherein we have to follow strict protocols and all that. The speculative thinking is not very much in place. So, in keeping that in mind, like what should be the core philosophies of any school of architecture?
Uh, well, I would say that at a much larger level, because architectural practice itself is not unidirectional, uh, it makes more sense for different colleges to follow different paths in terms of what kind of architects they want to produce. But I think very importantly, they should advertise or proclaim themselves to be that kind of schools. That we are a school who produces an architect of this type, who is privileging this over that. Uh, if I mean, if you're asking my personal opinion, I think I would say an school should produce an architect who is questioning in nature, who questions status quo, but at the same time is capable of taking action. To me, one without the other, both ways round is problematic. We have enough schools where people take actions or architects build without questioning, and we also have schools where architects are able to question a lot, but when it comes to producing on time and giving good quality work, they falter. Right? Both exist. The challenge is to be able to question and yet be cognizant of the fact that you there. I mean, it's a profession after all, so you have to be professional. Right? There is a professional ethic which has to be followed. So both should be there. I know it's a huge challenge, but the first step would be articulating that challenge and then getting into curriculum design, where you make options of curriculum design to check whether the curriculum is designed to cater to that goal. Yeah.
Is there any other question that anybody would want to ask? No, I think everybody is I think they're satisfied for now.
Yeah, for now is good.
No, so they put you through the ringer, Kashi. Lots of very interesting questions, very good answers, and you know, I think it was what you call thought-provoking. Yeah, because when somebody is able to clearly sort of state the kinds of things that you have understood and come up with in the field of architectural education and practice, then it becomes, you know, it becomes thought-provoking for people that are not like that, or, you know, so I thought it was extremely useful, and I think it must have been wonderful for the students to hear all this. And would you like to say something, Varisha, to sort of end the session?
Uh, so, like, as Anjali ma'am mentioned, the entire session went like very, very nicely, because these are some of the thoughts that we come across now that we'll be going outside. And it was something that these conversations were something that we were missing out on. And hence it was very, very helpful for us to have this session with you, sir.
I also thought that the idea of a question and answer format to sort of start the whole series was an excellent idea. Yeah, yeah. I didn't see any of the PG students. I don't know, are they there, or I had shared it as well. I'm not sure if they were there, but this applies across the across different levels, you know, these kinds of questions. So thank you very much, Kashi, and quite illuminating. Wonderful way to spend a Saturday morning. So thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
True. Thanks everyone. And if you have any more questions, we know you can just approach me.
Yeah, that's great. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah.
Bye. Bye.
Bye. Bye everyone.